All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first Urban Living webinar of 2024. And to kick off the new year, we are tackling a very important subject, and that's the circular economy, circularity, and its role in the real estate sector. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media, and we are a publisher of online B2B websites for the real estate and hospitality sectors. We also organise events and multimedia and digital events such as this one. We have got a fantastic panel of experts today. I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves briefly, and we'll go from left to right as we see them on the screen. So first up is Kelsey. Good morning to you, Kelsey. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Good morning, George. Thank you so much, and very happy to be here today, and pleasure to, meet many of you in the audience. My name is Kelsey. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Cutwork Architecture and Design Studio. We founded in 2016 around the idea that together has changed, as we call it. So we are entering an era where usages and demographics are changing so rapidly that we need architecture and design to think differently and to provide alternative solutions for residential, for travel, for hospitality, for work. So kind of around the idea of the shifting family demographics of traditional families, shifting work demographics, and also changes in the way we produce and design elements, notably in manufacturing space, such as prefab architecture, such as produce on-demand elements. And our specialty in the work that we do is really focused on adaptable spaces, and in particular, kind of this new genre of design that we're calling hybrid hospitality.
Good stuff. Good to have you with us, Kelsey. And next we have Nicki. Welcome to you, Nicki.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name's Nicki Page, and I founded TLC Harmony after spending many years in the Gulf region when I went in 1998. And TLC Harmony is an integrated company, a total life cycle company, where we look at the destination development, the development, operation, management, marketing, commercial results of the luxury segment, particularly focused on the Middle East and Asian markets, which is where my experience comes from on building sites, where it's very hot at 40, 50 degrees in the summer. And the company really focuses on how to economically verify your scope 3, those elephants in the room caused by guest travel and the supply chains, and the embodied carbon in concrete and steel when we build new assets. So our company really was inspired. We're entrepreneurs these days. But we were inspired by a vision of an old ruler in the Emirates, Sheikh Zayed, who had a statement which was build it and they will come. We like to say today there's a slight shift on that, even though 25 million did arrive in Dubai yearly and real estate went from boom to bust to boom, and I was in the middle of it all. We like to say, really, let's really consider the sustainable and regenerative position of our new real estate assets. And so TLC Harmony comes in, we feel, to add a very disruptive and evidence-based voice to this world.
Thank you, Nicki. And finally, Brendan, good morning to you.
Good morning, and I'm very pleased to be here. Brendan Geraghty, I'm the Chief Exec of the UKAA. We are the body that represents the emerging build-to-rent industry here in the UK. My background is in architecture. I was designing these buildings for about 10 years before I took on this role to really advance this nascent sector. And what it is institutionally backed rental offer, which is a new type of housing, if you like, and it draws heavily from the hospitality industry and is consumer centric in a way that residential real estate just hasn't been to date. So typically the product and the service that we offer are of higher quality than the sales market. Our buildings have amenities in them, but most of all our buildings have really, really good customer care, and really trying to provide an alternative, a very good alternative to some of the more negative sort of assumptions or a negative press around the rental sector. So it's going to be big. It's small at the moment, but it's going to grow from its sort of 85,000 homes that are open and operating right now to about 2 million homes at capacity. So it's quite a big sector, and it's growing very, very rapidly. So that's what the UKAA does.
Excellent. Thank you, Brendan. If you'd like to carry on the conversation with our panelists after the session, you can see their LinkedIn profiles in the chat, so you can contact them that way. There's going to be quite a lot of information in the chat today, actually. So when we get to the very end of the session, we'll leave it open for a couple of minutes so you can take some notes from all the good stuff that was in the chat. So we're going to have around about a 45-minute Q&A with the panelists, and then we'd like to have some input from you in the audience. So if you do have a question for us, please do submit it using the chat or the Q&A functions in Zoom, and we'll get around to answering as many as we can. You will receive a link to a recording of the session via email in the next couple of days too. So I just wanted to show a couple of slides for context, just so we can start to define some of the things we're speaking about today. This image here of the circular economy, I quite like this. It makes it fairly easy to understand. This is from the European Parliament, but it kind of gives you an idea of the various elements that go into making up circularity. Obviously, most of this applies to the built environment as well as other industries, but it's a fairly general definition. But if we go on to the next slide, this is more pertinent to the built environment, and this is from a report called From Principles to Practices, which has been published by Arup and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And this is basically 5 circular business models for real estate, which they've suggested, each of which they say offers better financial returns than business as usual. So we've got flexible spaces, which have lots of different uses to unlock the potential of underutilized space in buildings. Adaptable assets, creating buildings which are resilient to both changing market conditions and social expectations by being able to adapt to alternative uses. Relocatable buildings, which is an interesting one, which can move from one site to the next. They're modular and deconstructible. Residual value is something which is worth considering. Tradable futures contracts related to the value of building materials at deconstruction. And finally, performance procurement, product as a service business model scaled up to whole building systems. So some food for thought there. We will get stuck into our conversation now. I wanted to kick off by asking Kelsey, as a design and an architectural practice, what does circular design mean to you, and how much do you consider the concept when you're taking on a new project?
Thank you, George. So we take the circularity angle from a few different places. And if we look back to the slide you just shared, I think the core is around flexible space and around the production method. So we're very interested in how design can help create flexible multi-use spaces that have a different usage, whether it's the time of the day, whether it's the day of the week, whether it's the part of the year. And we really find that when spaces are designed in this way, it's very sustainable, let's say, without even taking materials or production method into use. If we can do more in less space, we need less space to live in. And then on top of that, is it okay if I share my screen really fast? Is that an option here, George, just for a quick second?
It should be. If one of my colleagues in the background who's running the show can let Kelsey share her screen for a minute, we can give this a go.
Perfect. Can you see from my side here? Wonderful. Okay, so I see a yes from Brendan. Do you see my screen? Do you see a module here? Wonderful. Okay. So I think this project will really, and sometimes visuals work better than words, very quickly show you exactly what I mean. So this was a scale 1 prototype of a co-living design that we developed for Bouygues Immobilier in France, one of the largest construction companies and real estate developers. And this was a co-living product, so quite innovative in the space. For those of you that don't know maybe co-living yet, the idea is that we have individual smaller bedroom typologies with access to shared common spaces, such as shared kitchens, shared living rooms, shared workspace. And the whole idea of this project was, how can design help us do more in less space? And what you're seeing here is a scale 1 prototype of the design, which was built off-site in modular construction with a partner in Poland. So when we understand here, maybe this is kind of some of the key concept elements were, for example, in a room of 20 to 25 square meters, which, you know, for better or for worse, is what we're seeing in very dense, compact cities such as Paris, such as London, such as New York. How can we get more creative with how to use the floor plate more effectively? So here we designed a bed that goes up and down and disappears completely when it's not in use. We also designed a kitchenette element that can be completely hidden away because usages are changing. Some people who return from work don't even want to cook anymore. They want to order food or put something in the microwave. So for, you know, different types of users, how can we make sure the space is very flexible and not being so prescriptive, but more just creating the opportunity for people to use the space the way that they do. And this was fully designed and offsite in a factory in Poland. So this means there's less waste. There was more thinking around how everything can be designed from the beginning to be as efficient as possible. So, you know, to wrap about your question, you know, for us, we look at this from the beginning at concept level, and we're imagining all the way through production method how it's going to be produced.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelsey. That's a really interesting looking project. I'd like to find out more about that. Let's talk about levels of engagement and attitudes. Brendan, how engaged is the developer and investment community with circularity in, let's call it, the broader living sector?
I think they're becoming increasingly engaged. It's my view that so the capital markets, I mean, it's a global source of funding for most of these projects anywhere in the world, and depending on that source of that capital, there's different attitudes. But what is emerging, particularly from the European sources of capital and to some extent the Americans, is a real understanding that sustainability is good for business. And if you work with the markets, or the funders that I work with, who are institutional funders, they're the pension funds, and they are, you know, they're managing billions and billions of pounds, and it's people's pensions, and very often people's pensions and so on. They take their reputational damage risk very, very seriously. And what that has led to is much more thoughtful thinking, decision making, and long-term decision making around how they approach the creation of residential buildings and then hold those buildings and operate them over time. So I believe that the capital markets are going to deliver net zero way ahead of government, certainly in the UK. Certainly this government's gone backwards, the current government's gone backwards in its delivery of net zero. So I'm very encouraged by that, but that doesn't mean everybody's doing it. But what we're seeing coming through is that the need to look at sustainability issues, at the circular economy, operational net zero, embodied net zero, is coming from the funders. It's not coming from anywhere else. In 30 years as an architect, I've never experienced this. So we are seeing a change, and that change is going as far as the whole life costing of the building. That's very new in build to rent. Build to rent is innovating all of the time. I mean, co-living, a brilliant co-living project you showed us there, Kelsey. The build to rent industry is getting right behind co-living. They see it as a really, really good product in between other spaces, in between sort of different types of homes, and are looking to deliver that. As we are looking at volumetric, we now have the two tallest, or the second and third tallest volumetric buildings in London, in Europe, and they're in London down in Croydon, and they're all built to rent or co-living blocks. So our industry is innovating and leading the residential sector, I would argue, and the people who are really leading us are our funders, and that's quite a remarkable position.
Nicki, you are working in the hospitality sector rather than the residential. Does what Brendan talks about, does that resonate with you, or because hospitality tends to be funded by a different group of investors on the whole, are we facing a different situation in the hospitality industry?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk across hotels, resorts, integrated developments of apartments with hotels and various mixed use opportunities, which is my world. And in my view, I've looked and been involved in huge mega project openings in the Gulf, in the UK. And so my knowledge comes from on the ground as a commercial and marketing person, where I am obsessed by the guest, number one. So within the hospitality world, what I see is that you have the main hotel players that are controlling 75+% of the hotel stock, the rooms out there in the world. And those CEOs have been very slow, in my view, to adopt and adapt to what are critical issues of scope 3. So our industry has been jollying along talking about scope 1 and 2, and we know that that's approximately only 15% of the harm impacts to nature. And really, this issue of guest travel and the supply chains, which is 80+% of the harms to nature out of the hospitality industry or hotel development world, is being completely ignored to date. So what do I say about that? Well, I say that, yes, we are on a journey, all of us, okay? I'm sure all of us, you know, at heart wants the best for nature. We want to protect our natural assets. But sometimes the profit motive overrides it. And I find that those companies that cannot economically verify their position are basically losing business, and that hurts them. It not only hurts their reputation, but it hurts their bottom line. And when you start then talking to business about that in a total sense, okay, then suddenly we're starting, in my view, to see a shift. It's a bit like the stick and the carrot, okay? We prefer to have a more proactive, ethical position on how you do business, the business of real estate within hospitality or tourism development. We like to come at it from that, but often business doesn't really do that. It looks at the money, and it's money driven. So we have shown that, firstly, we stand that projects have to be good for people, local people, our collective Mother Earth, but also we show how it can be good for business, the bottom line. And the sustainable agenda, we have evidence based on the end user consumer, and they are women basically making decisions, spending their money, where to buy, where to stay, what they like, especially on the luxury brands. They'll pay premiums on other brands as evidence of up to 23%. That's why Bentley and Stella McCartney are doing verified sustainable jumpers or cars, because that increase on, in my world, RevPAR, which we can achieve, we can make more money for owners by authentically following an economic verified sustainable path. And I think when you start talking about that in a circular way, starting with the end in sight, your consumer and your targeted audience, and understanding how these projects ultimately, once they're built and everybody's run off the site, and you're there having to sell it and deliver daily to those owners who've invested their 800 million or more, you know, where are my returns, Nicki? You know, you're sitting on the hot seat. It really puts a sharp focus as to why we really have to accelerate the journey to sustainability in a circular way, and that how, in my view, each of the segments within the supply chain. So you got the owner, let's assume, signing off the check, who is appointing a development company, who's appointing a contractor, who's appointing the architect, and all these different people are only knowledgeable about their own little bit. So if I talk to an architect about really the detail of technical specification on concrete, they haven't got a clue because they're not trained to know it. So we've got lots of silos. We've got an opportunity, in our view, to bring a TLC, a total life cycle circular approach that is good for people, planet and business. And I would like to see a much more robust and accelerated position from our world of hotels and hospitality, which accounts for 8% of GDP, by the way, and is churning out quite a bit of CO2. So, yeah, it's all about making money, but doing it sustainably and properly.
Great stuff. Thank you, Nicki. Kelsey, Nicki mentioned the supply chain a couple of times there. Obviously, there are a lot of constituent elements that go to make up a new building. Do we have the tools available to assess the supply chain, the various components of a new building for their kind of environmental credentials and how they fit into a circular model, or do you have to go out and do all that research yourself?
Great question, George. You know, I think we're getting better and better. There's a lot of work to be done. What we're, you know, one of the main reasons why we are interested in offsite construction is because everything is much more trackable, measurable, and we're able to understand more clearly the impacts of the build. You know, it's definitely not a solution for every project, but I think we will see in the future a shift towards this type of construction, especially in the realms of hospitality and eventually residential. I think there's also a big conception of modular that it's tiny boxes that, you know, some nightmare images from the 70s and 80s that we're going to have to get over and realize that, you know, it's just a constraint as well as many other constraints exist in the design process, and that a lot of creativity can emerge from that. But when we think about, you know, the benefits of offsite and how we can already measure it in the supply chain, we see, you know, the biggest advantage is a reduced amount of time for the both planning and the construction site. Being able to see something like 30 to 50% of time saved in the planning process, up to 90% of waste reduced from a construction site when we build within a factory. We see a CO2 reduction. We see costs are much more able to be tracked and understood once we're building in a factory. And we see improved quality that we can measure from A to Z across the project. So, you know, I do believe that this is a systemic problem, and that offsite and factory build housing is definitely a way to help manage that from the root, instead of just trying to do a build and then measure it after it's been delivered.
Mm-hmm. And when you're coming up with a new concept, what do you kind of model as the average useful lifespan of a new building, and are some of the elements that you use in building it, are they reusable? You know, when a building has come to the end of its useful life, can some of those components be used in a new structure, which is, you know, I guess that's the ultimate example of circularity, if we can start doing that.
You know, I maybe I'll also reach to hang on, let me see here. Maybe I'll also reach to Brendan for this one as an architect as well, and be able to include him into the question of the lifespan of new build with this. Brendan, how do you feel about this topic?
Look, I think we need to put this in context. This is a dawning reality. The importance of the circular economy and the need to think that way is a dawning reality. Now, do we have the architects and designers around who are mindful of this? Yes, we do. But it's not a universal understanding at the moment. So what does this mean? It means we kind of have to design backwards. We have to design with the replacement in mind and bring that through. We spoke, perhaps an easier way to explain this is using the volumetric off-site construction, which you've mentioned. Now, I've designed a bespoke build-to-rent system using a volumetric system. And you do not, in traditional design where it's bricks and mortars, you can basically design anything you want because it's fairly flexible, and problems get resolved on site rather than anywhere else. The coordination of the design is often comes very, very late in the process. With offsite and with the circular economy, you have to design everything in detail from the get-go, and you can't go into manufacturing and you can't go into assembly on site until you've worked it all out. And this mind shift is what's needed with the circular economy as well. When I did volumetric design and buildings, the first person I appointed to the team was an interior designer. People thought I was mad. I said, but people are living in this. Let's get somebody who's a specialist in living and livability to be designing the inside of this, and let's leave the engineering bit, which everybody focused on up until then, where it should be in an efficient manufacturing objectives rather than developing the aesthetics as well. So everything had to change, and we see that the offsite world is probably leading the way of that cultural intellectual change applied to offsite, but that cultural intellectual change, that paradigm shift, is really the same kind of thinking we need for the circular economy. And it's slowly coming there, and we have models that can help us. If we look at FSC Timber, which is a chain of custody process for timber, which is generally now well supported across the world. It may not be perfect, but it took a hell of a lot of work to get that established and used by our construction industry. And we needed governmental cooperation, and probably took 30 years from inception to when it was adopted by the industry. It's not a perfect system, but we've shown in construction that we can do it. We've done it before. We did it on a global scale, and I think with the circular economy, embedded carbon, and all that stuff, we can do it again. We need to just we have the means. We just need to have the collective will.
Brendan, if we could just go back to the initial question for a moment. I'm interested to know, so let's say, for example, some of these build-to-rent towers that are coming out of the ground in London and other UK cities now, what is their estimated effective lifespan, and are they being built with one eye on having some of the material within those reused in another incarnation when they come to the end of that lifespan, or are we not there yet?
No, we are there. We're on the reuse. We're there on the lifespan. Technically, or from an insurance mortgage perspective, 90 years. They're happy with 90 years. When the insurance industry turns around to the real estate industry and says, we don't want 90 years anymore, we want 900 years, that's when we'll see some major changes. So at the moment, the design life, I mean, it depends who you speak to. Your structural engineers, despite their legal obligation to meet the mortgage criteria or the financial obligation, are designing superstructures for much longer than that, and that's a good thing. And I think architects are generally moving to understand, and indeed it's part of the best practice and emerging building regulations that we're going to have to do that anyway. So is it germane? No. Is it accelerating? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Brendan. I'm just staying with you for a moment, Brendan. Conversions and reuse as opposed to new build seems to be fairly established direction of travel amongst planning authorities now. Do you think this is going to affect the kind of buildings that are being delivered in the build to rent sector, or do you think BTR, as it has been up till now, is predominantly going to be a new build product?
It has been predominantly new build, although there are conversion buildings, especially office to residential conversions, and in the build to rent space. I think that the conversion of buildings to residential is now going to accelerate. Not every building is easy to convert to residential, especially deep plan buildings, and retail buildings are certainly not great candidates. So, I think demolition is going to become a dirty word. It already is, really, and the challenge of finding ways of adapting our buildings is now upon the architects and the developers and those who want to be, to Nicki's point, exercise responsible business and care for the planet. So we have no choice but to do that. But are we mature in that process? I would say no. I think people are still scratching their heads about what to do with some of the buildings. That the easiest thing in many respects is to knock it down and start again. But they're taking on the challenge of trying to find out what they could do to avoid that.
Yeah. Thanks, Brendan. Okay, let's talk a bit about operational efficiency, how to make a building as efficient as possible. I think one area of this equation where we're perhaps lacking is in engagement with the end user, whether that's a hotel guest, whether that's a student in a new PBSA building or so on. I think engagement and education of the end user is critical in making them understand their role in making a building as efficient as possible and preserving resources. Nicki, do you think hotel guests care about this sort of thing? And do you think hotel operators and hospitality operators are doing enough to educate their guests about what they could be doing?
I'm going to talk again at the luxury end of the market, because sustainability really has a place. It's more expensive to do things sustainably initially. I'll give you an example from another industry. Remember when organic food suddenly burst onto the market and we all had to run to Waitrose to buy our organic bananas, and they had a pretty strong price premium on them. Slowly, as the market evolved, the price came down and more people could go to Aldi's and buy organic bananas. But the luxury side of the market, because people with money can afford it, drives, in our view, the luxury world of hospitality or luxury real estate purchases. And the guest or the end user, the purchaser, because many of them in this world are female, we know that they have a higher propensity to spend more on such verified sustainable brands and products. And they'll spend up to 24%, 25% more. Now, the guest is demanding change. The consumer is getting more aware and savvy, whether they're younger, millennials, absolutely, where climate change is the #1 issue for them, or to those that are slightly older and have money to flash about and to have beautiful holidays in gorgeous places and buy wonderful real estate. So from the consumer point of view, there is a dawning of reality. Now that push, okay, from your ultimate client is going to buy this stuff or rent this stuff, who are demanding to know what's under the hood, the DNA of the situation, I think is becoming much more evident. And I think you'll see a lot more brands and developers having to address this, because otherwise they simply won't be able to sell their stuff ultimately to certain target audiences. Their DNA's got to be checked, it's got to be verified, and we've got to know truly what the heck it is we're buying or what we're renting or where we're going. So that would be my first thing. I think the consumer ultimately, it's a bit like, with all respect to the Catholic faith, it's a bit like buying penance, of being naughty, so I'll sort of pay a premium to sort of have my guilt taken away for the moment. And it's a bit like that with the sustainable choice. People want, in our view, certain segments really want to do good. They really, really want to do the right thing, okay? And they kind of feel a little bit guilty that actually they are able to somewhat indulge themselves. So how to do that? Well, they can do it by going and being in verified properties, buying verified sustainable properties, and then contributing to the harm they've done when they travel or stay in these places with offset. Okay, and I think there's a growing market and understanding there within the consumer. So if the hotelier or the owners or the management companies are obsessed truly with their luxury users, then they are going to have to accelerate their position. As I said to you, they're only looking at scope 1 and 2 right now, which is only 15% of the damage from the operation. So therein lies a massive chasm of opportunity to do it better, to do it verified, economically, sustainably better. And a position for us is that if you look at from the consumer point of view in this luxury segment particularly, or millennials even, when a consumer is faced with over 300 B2B badges of honour of it's green this, it's green that, okay, and they're slapped all over the place, the consumer is completely confused. I'm completely confused, really. And actually these sort of green badges of honour are only dealing with scope 1 and 2. They've ignored the elephant in the room or the development. So I think we've got a long way to go. I'm not suggesting that the global hotel groups are not now actively on it. They are. All of them have now active sustainability departments, which they never had. But you ask yourself, honestly, the CEO sitting there at the top, you know, is that sustainability lead on the real estate asset position, a C-suite decision maker on budget? Can they sign off stuff? Probably not, in my view, from what I've seen. So I think we've got a changing market with different dynamics going on. And there are a lot of ethical consumers, and I think an industry often that wants to do right, but isn't, because they're not aware, perhaps, they're not educated enough, perhaps, they know their own little piece of this jigsaw, but it's a TLC, it's a total life cycle position. And I think we all need, and I've tried over the last 2 years since we got on this mission possible, although difficult, to become very knowledgeable as best I can of the architectural position, the construction position, the concrete position, and then align behind me the best in the world who really know their stuff. Because nobody can know everything, right? And I'm happy to acknowledge I certainly don't know lots, but I do know a little bit about quite a lot. And it starts to show that actually this silo working is not good, that ultimately you need a visionary owner that will sign off the check and that has the correct input to him or her, all right, the right guidance of advice. Because what I've seen in the construction world on sites with hundreds and hundreds of people running about and millions being spent, it's a bit like the Wild West in certain places. And I think we just need to appreciate ultimately that we have one world, one natural assets that we are harming because of the way we construct and build and design. And because of that, if we do not take charge of it and change the way we go about the business of sustainable design, construction, operation and management in a total system, we're on a hiding to nothing, because we're already, as we know, the effects of our industry on climate, and not just carbon emissions. It's not just carbon, it's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's the validation of this on biodiversity loss. And all of that has also been somewhat forgotten about when you economically look at the problem of this harm impact that our industry is doing. So I think our industry needs to learn from other industries. When we set up TLC, I had to go outside of my world completely to meet Leo, who came from UK government treasury, a data-driven science analyst who was economically evaluating and measuring harms to society for government. So, for example, if you kill somebody in the UK today, you murder somebody, it's cost 1.65 million per murder. And so Treasury, looking at this, says, well, we don't want all of that, and neither does our society want murders. we're going to sort of spend $500,000 against the projected possible number of murders to stop the murders. All right. And this economic validation and harm impacts to society. When I saw what Leo was doing, I was amazed. I had no idea that the country ran like that. So we took that thinking and we plonked it on top of our global destination development and real estate world of luxury hospitality or apartment buildings or whatever it was, to economically validate. And that's what we do. There's no skirting around it. And that's quite useful. That's quite useful.
There's a lot to unpack there. There's an awful lot to unpack there, Nicki. But Brendan, one of the things Nicki mentioned there was consumer attitudes and the power that they have when making choices. Are you saying in the build to rent sector, are people making their decisions about where to live based on the operator and the building performance in terms of sustainability and so on?
We are starting to see that. I think residential real estate has finally woken up to the importance of the consumer and how powerful a force they are and what a good force they can be. Last year, the property agencies, I think it was Knight Frank, did some research. This is just in the midst of the energy crisis, which is still really ongoing. That the second, so when people make a decision to move somewhere, it's location, it's rent, it's various decisions are made that inform the final decision. But what had rushed up the ranks was the cost of it, the utility bills, the energy costs of the home. That was the second most important decision in the decision matrix process. Now that took environmental matters straight into consumer culture. Whereas up until that point in residential real estate, it was early adopters and the motivated who would pay that premium. But that showed that the green agenda had moved squarely into consumer culture, in my mind, for the very first time in residential real estate. That has gone on from there with a rising expectation that new homes and flats and whatever they may be don't have high energy bills. In fact, there are energy companies now offering a deal. I won't mention all the detail, but I know these are being considered for the marketplace, that they will not charge anything for the energy if it's a net zero house. So you'll get your energy for free. But there's perversity within this process as well. If you do micro generation in your home, like photovoltaics, the grid will only accept so much energy. So we have the power and we have the means to generate more energy, but we're not able to distribute it or get credit for it. So it's coming to I think the consumers are waking up to the importance of it on an ethical and sustainability level, but the business side of it is also accompanies that, and the two work very, very well together. The consumer markets will ultimately, in my mind, deliver the sustainability agenda as we simplify the messages and the expected behavior, if you like.
Thanks, Brendan. Kelsey, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, great responses, both Nicki and Brendan. Just a little to piggyback and kind of from our side, we really see what feels like a paradigm shift in the perception of the user. And I think, the previous era, let's say, developers, operators, I believe there was an idea that to consider the users or to think about users was something they couldn't afford to do or was a luxury. And I think now we're moving into an era where to not consider users, developers can't afford to not consider users. And before it was as if, we build the box and then we figure out who comes inside. And now I think coming to the center is we figure out who's going to be inside and then we build the box around that, just to very simplify it. And when we see leaders and pioneers in, for example, in hospitality products such as Zoku in Amsterdam, we see that the user was at the center of everything, all of the design decisions. And I think with an era of transparency, with social media, with the visibility of all products the way it is, developers and operators can no longer afford to not consider who's going to be inside and build around it. The power dynamics have shifted.
Kelsey, one of the points you made earlier was that a building that has spaces that can be used in several different ways takes up less space than a building that needs single use spaces for all those things. Can you talk about that a bit more and talk about how you incorporate that into your designs, and maybe give us some examples of perhaps what a single space can be used for during the course of a day, what the different uses could be for one particular space?
So I'll reference back to the project I shared with you on the screen earlier. And, when we were in the early stages of that project, one of the things that we brought to the table in the brief definition in the early workshops and research phases was, if we can live in 20 square meters and we can do 5 different activities fully inside, it's not that each activity gets reduced to a corner, but we can actually transform the space to fully do these activities. We can live as if we're in 100 square meters. And of course, this is very visionary and very, but it puts the point that if we can make the bed disappear and inside of this space, we can host 6 friends for a dinner, we can live as if we were in double the amount of space. And it's just about kind of stacking usages within the same space, where we find a lot of interesting combinations for how a space can be used. For example, the project Polyroom I showed, we can imagine eating, we can imagine exercising, we can imagine hosting. The space can transform into a full dressing room. So you have a wardrobe that pulls out of a compact drawer. You can use a full-length mirror in the space, and you can also cook inside. Then we have a very interesting, very dynamic space that can be transformed for different usages. And, maybe just a little bit about my background. I'm from the US originally, and I've lived in Paris for the last 10 years. So I've seen both sides of the equation very intimately. My father was a developer, and he built what we can, understand as the McMansion house, where you have a formal dining room that maybe is used once a year, and you have a formal living room that is never used. And then I've lived in Paris, where in 40 square meters, you're forced to do everything with your life. So somewhere between the two, we see an intelligence in the design from the very beginning that can allow us to do more in less space, but not feel like it's a trade-off. The other kind of example I can give, and my co-founder is half Japanese, so we have a lot of influence of Japanese compact design in our studio. And when you go to Japan, even in the most compact of space, there's been a lot of intelligence and thinking around everything that you need to do. So, it's a small compact bathroom, but there's a hook for your towel, there's a hook for your clothes. This we feel is luxury, when the whole user journey has been really intimately thought of. So, all of your needs have been thought of in the space.
Great stuff. Thank you, Kelsey. Brenda, let's move on and talk about technology for a minute or two. What is the role of technology and data in monitoring resource usage and driving improvement in building operations, but both kind of back end and user facing?
I mean, I think moving into the digital age and the data age, if nothing else, is forcing a culture of measuring. The question is, what do you measure? And then when you have that data, what do you do with it? What questions do you ask it? So I would say, my prediction is that the digitization of our homes has just started, and not just our homes and how we use them on a personal level, but the overall performance of our buildings, particularly bigger buildings. So, we should be able to very accurately monitor and predict our energy consumption. See, we should be able to very soon, or in most buildings, be able to understand when there's a failure and quickly intervene to fix that failure. So, if we look at the ESG sort of agenda, which has been forced on us, in many ways, the E is the easier one to measure because it's scientific. You're either using carbon or you're not using carbon. There's either embodied energy or there isn't embodied energy in whatever the material might be. We're not completely able to do all of that capturing of that data, but the journey has started and we're quite a long way down. I think the behavioral side of the building and how, you can have the greenest building in the world, but if you don't behave in a way that supports that design, you might as well not have bothered. And I think that what we will see the digital or new aspects of the digital kind of ecosystem is looking at our behavior, and through various interventions, whether it be through gamification or peer group pressure or whatever the case may be, we will see behaviors changing. So in build to rent land, we have already evidence of this. One of our operators, Moda, has been tracking both the building and the behavior in the building for some time now, and they have taken that data and look for opportunities to educate, to advocate, but not in a preachy way, in a social way, in a softer way. But the results are magnificent. The culture and the community in these buildings are taking on the agenda themselves, and they are when I say forcing, they are encouraging change within that community with sort of background support from the owners and the operators, and that's the sort of that's digitally enabled, or that's digitally supported human behavioral change. So the technology, the smart building thing, we know about that. We know what sort of things you can work your washing machine from your phone, and that's all great, and that's going to continue. But I think the real delivery side and the real cutting edge now is how we look at behavior and how we make it easy to make change, because nobody likes change. We'd much rather stay the way we are. And I think the digital world has a huge part to play in this.
Brendan, sticking with you for a minute, you mentioned measurement there. Another thing that is starting to be measured now is the asset value premium in efficient buildings, both from an operational perspective, but also if an investor or an owner wants to sell an asset or a portfolio. How significant is this becoming now, do you think, in the kind of financial decisions behind development?
It's absolutely huge. So if we look at operational real estate, and I think the hospitality energy is much further down the line than the residential world is in this respect, is that the cost of running that building is a major business cost and needs to be managed. So in the sales world, you build the building, you sell it, and you move on, and nobody cares really. But in the operational world, particularly if the building has been held, the asset has been held for 30 years or more, which is not untypical for some of our investors, or that's the projected life that they'll hold the building for. And if they do sell, they'll sell to another institutional investor who will hold it as well. The operational costs are massive. So we are seeing what I would call the rise of the operational brief affecting the design brief of the asset in the first instance. Now, this is again is being led by build to rent, partly because it is an operational asset, but also partly because there's a recognition that the more attention you pay to the operational dynamics, potentially the better the building, the cheaper the building to construct as well. And when we overlay the Building Safety Act, which is a year-old regulation now here in the UK, that forward thinking of how the building will perform from a safety perspective is now a statutory requirement. It will only take a little bit more thinking of that same sort of logic model to add in the operational and the environmental aspects of that as well. So the operational brief and build to rent is going to dominate the way we design our buildings going forward. At the moment, some are, because a lot of our stock is for sale stock that we've converted to rent, and so hasn't been designed to an operational model. Particularly, it gets kind of shoehorned in when they get the asset. So it is going to be a major part of it, because the net operating income is ultimately the measure of the success of the building in real terms.
And are we too early in the journey to assess whether asset value is significantly affected by environmental performance in terms of buying and selling buildings?
I think dirty buildings will not be sold. I mean, okay, in very simple terms, a lot of the big portfolio holders are selling off their dirty buildings because it's just easier than remedying them. That's perhaps not good practice, but that's what's happening. I think going as we go forward, poorly performing buildings will just achieve that they'll be sold and they'll be invested in, but at a massive discount to better performing buildings. So I think the value of environmentally, efficient and carbon efficient buildings, both in the construction and the operational phase, the value of those will increase. We will see that increasing as we go forward.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Brendan. I think that's a great note to leave it on. That we are very much at the early stages of this journey, this essential journey, but we are starting to move in the right direction. But there's a long way to go yet. Thanks to all our speakers today for their input. It's been a really interesting session. I'm just going to show a few more slides before we sign off. And as I mentioned, we'll leave the session open for a couple of minutes so that you can take some notes if you want to. The next webinar that we're hosting is actually from our sister brand, Service Department News, but I thought I'd flag it up here because it's pertinent to what we've been discussing today. And that's going to be taking a detailed look at transforming vacant buildings into apart hotels, conversions, specifically for the apart hotel use. We've seen a lot of that recently, actually. My colleague Eloise is going to be moderating that one. That's taking place on the 25th of January at 2 p.m. And if you'd like to register for that one, you should be able to see the link in the chat. A quick plug for an event that we are hosting next week in Northern Ireland. It's my favourite event of the ones we do. It's called Recharge. It moves around a different European city every year. I'm glad to say Brendan will be joining us there amongst many other hospitality and real estate professionals. There are still a handful of tickets left if you'd like to come. Fairly short notice, I know, but it will be worth it. And the link to get those is also in the chat. If you'd like to work with us at IHM across any of our in-person or digital offers, drop my colleague Henry a line. You can see his details on the screen there and also in the chat. And finally, thanks very much to everybody. Thanks to you for watching. Thanks to Kelsey, to Brendan and Nicki for their fantastic insights today. If you're on any of the social channels, you can see there, give us a follow. We're quite active on all of those. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see some of you in Belfast next week. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.